here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Today, I want to discuss what it means to be healthy in 2024 and why that matters for concussion, why that matters for post-concussion. My tagline since joining social media in 2018 has been hashtag healthy on purpose. And so I kind of wanted to elaborate on that a bit. It's always in the background, like healthy on purpose is always in the background, but the passion for it kind of comes in waves. And I don't know what it is, but I'm just kind of amped up on it right now. So this is actually, I'm going to read from my December 2022 newsletter, which is just like, what does it mean to be healthy on purpose? And then I'm going to put some context to it. Let's see here. Make sure the audio is going, because I think something's wrong with my audio on YouTube. So let's see what's going on here. Gotta love technology. There we go. Let's see here. Pop, pop, pop. Is that connected? Sorry, everybody. Well, YouTube might just be a silent stream. Let's see here. All right, well, the show will go on anyway. So, all right, so where was I? So basically, this is going to be from a 2022 newsletter. The passion for healthy on purpose kind of comes in waves. It's always in the background, but I'm just feeling more like amped on it recently. So I'm going to read from this newsletter, and then I'm going to tie it into the context of concussion because it really, really matters. It really, really matters. If you're on YouTube right now, comment if you can hear me. But anyway, so what does it mean to be healthy on purpose? Nowadays, it means that you must swim against the current. So watch TV, scroll social media. You'll find endless ads for fast food, snacks, alcohol, pharmaceutical drugs. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of those things in particular. There's no judgment. I enjoy Chick-fil-A every now and then. I eat processed crackers every now and then. I'll drink an old fashioned. I like bourbon if it's like my liquor of choice. And I take medication occasionally, like anyone. Healthy on purpose means, though, that when we begin to swim upstream, we realize that the norm of the Western world, the water that we naturally drift in, is leading us towards a waterfall of unhealthy on accident rather than healthy on purpose. So it'll play on words there. Regular meals of ultra-processed foods, binge drinking at the end of the work week, keeping our phones in front of our faces until the wee hours of the night, and covering our back pain from a sedentary lifestyle with NSAIDs or Tylenol ultimately leads us to have fucked up guts, poor sleep, altered energy metabolism, fast-tracked cardiometabolic diseases. So with that, we see someone dies of cardiovascular disease in the US every 34 seconds, despite almost 1 in 4 people taking 3 or more prescription drugs. So we're wildly medicated and wildly sick. So to be healthy on purpose really means reclaiming ownership over your physical, mental, and emotional health. It's not biohacking. There's no shortcuts. It's really just a sobering acceptance of your daily choices and behaviors. You either accumulate behaviors that add to your health and longevity, or they detract from your health and longevity, regardless of how you feel about it or what you believe. That's just kind of what it is. So back to a previous example, is the old fashioned I enjoy beneficial for my liver, my gut microbiome, my brain, my cardiovascular system? Not a chance. But is enjoying one of these like once a quarter going to take down my health and ruin me? Not a chance either. On the flip side, is a single 10-minute walk going to prevent a heart attack 20 years from now? Not a chance. But is a 10-minute walk every single day going to lower my risk of heart attack? You betcha. It's a balance and a game of investments and withdrawals. So further, there's not one right way to be healthy on purpose for everyone. So anytime you see this dogmatic thing here, like with influencers on social media, it's just probably it's true for them, it's true for someone else, but maybe not for you. There's not one diet, one magical cocktail of supplements, one workout regimen, or a single anything that is right for everyone. We all have different genetics, social environments, cultural and religious backgrounds, socioeconomic standing, caregiving duties, etc. Being healthy on purpose means owning your best choices in your context, doing the best that you can with what you have and what you know. Make a 7-figure salary, you likely have the resources to do anything and hire anyone you'd like to help you be healthy on purpose. Watching this on a paycheck to paycheck wage in the middle of a food desert with children at home, you might have to make the best choices in that environment with the resources you have. What's healthy is going to be different in both of those. In both extremes, though, you're being healthy on purpose. It's a way of living and thinking. It's not some medal or badge that you achieve once and forever. So that's my soapbox speech. That was the newsletter from December 2022. To tie it back into concussion, your pre-injury health matters. And while no one ever plans for a concussion, the data is that someone experiences a TBI, traumatic brain injury, every 15 seconds. There's been a lot of TBI since this live even started. And we know that from other data, about 50% of the world population is going to sustain at least one traumatic brain injury in their lifetime. And about 80% of those are going to be concussions. So almost every other person you've ever interacted with, every other person on this live stream has had or will have a concussion at some point in their life. And that's because, I mean, even if you're not athletes, the main causes of concussions are motor vehicle accidents, or car accidents, and accidental falls, not sports. I see a lot of contact athletes, but I see even more non-contact athletes and just non-athletes. No one plans for a concussion, but they happen. And the healthier that you can enter the injury, the better your recovery. We have data that pre-existing, where am I at? We have, I don't want to jump around too much, but we have data that pre-existing anxiety, pre-existing depression, pre-existing migraine disorder, et cetera, can all worsen post-concussion. If you had migraines before the concussion, you're probably going to have them after and maybe a little bit more severe. If you had anxiety before the concussion, you're probably going to have it after and maybe a little bit more severe. Concussion fights dirty in a sense. I believe that's Mickey Collins from UPMC that says that. Even a family history of anxiety. Mom is anxious, and I was never anxious, but now after the concussion, I have anxiety. We have data that obesity worsens post-injury inflammation, leading to a risk of delayed recovery. We have data that the Western diet, meaning a mostly processed food diet, can worsen and delay recovery through inflammatory mechanisms. What I know from clinical experience, and what we know from animal data, and what we have from some human data, is that the person who enters the injury with good cardiovascular fitness, you don't have to be an animal, you don't have to be like a freak, but just physically fit. So good cardiovascular fitness, minimally processed diet most days, good sleep habits, good mental health, grit, growth mindset, etc. That person entering the injury is usually going to exit the injury a lot faster, usually kind of on that textbook timeline of like 3 to 5 days worse symptoms, 5 to 10 days symptoms start to resolve, 21 to 30 days like total clearance. The person who enters their injury, there's no shame when I say this is just kind of what the data shows. Person who enters the injury out of shape, so deconditioned, overweight, mostly processed food, poor hydration, poor sleep habits, poor mental health, so unacknowledged or unmanaged anxiety, depression, etc. That person is usually going to be in the recovery wagon for longer. And there's no shame in that. It's just that's kind of what the data shows. So when we're thinking about being healthy on purpose, whether you're in the kind of contact sports world or not, if you're just in the world, you kind of should want to be healthy just because this is the one body you get. You should want to take care of it. That's just my stance. But also a TBI happens every 15 seconds, according to the CDC data. Around half of the world's population is going to sustain a concussion, at least one in their lifetime. And so the better you can enter that injury, the better you're going to leave that injury. And again, no one plans for concussion, but they happen. Most commonly, car accidents and accidental falls. And so that is kind of, it's a quick one today, but that's kind of my spiel. The summer months are incredibly slow, not incredibly slow, but they drop off dramatically. Usually from about May to October, we see things slow down because contact sports slow down, and I start to see mostly virtual and mostly post-concussion. But if you are an athlete or you are contact sports or military or police where you're at risk of head contact, this is something to think about. This is something, if you're in the off season or you're someone who's at higher risk, something to kind of think about acutely. We can look at things like your vitamin D, your omega-3 index. We can look at your VO2 max. We can look at different things to try to make sure you are as healthy as you can be should an injury occur. And then if not, if you're in the post-concussion bucket, all the basics matter. All the foundations of health matter. I say healthy on purpose, nutrition, movement, mindset. Those foundational pieces really, really matter. So that's more of a soapbox than like a live and stuff, but I'll open up to any questions, any comments. I see some stuff coming in on Instagram. Someone on YouTube has been dealing with back, head, and neck pain. Yep. I don't know there's a question tied to that, but yeah. All right. So Multiple reasons for migraine. Can you explain why, since my concussion, diet substantially exacerbated my headaches and causes me migraines? I eat so meticulously to manage this. Yeah. So when we think about migraine, so if we think about migraine independent of concussion, we just think about migraine. There's four pillars that we typically look at, and I took this from Dr. Adam Harcourt. But four pillars. You're going to have basically think about four things that kind of there's a bucket model. So you pour stressors into a bucket, and when that bucket spills, you start to experience migraine. The size of the bucket itself is sort of your neurologic integrity. So vestibular function, frontal lobe, pain inhibition, different things like that. And then the stressors you can pour in could be hormonal imbalances, inflammatory foods, and musculoskeletal stressors. So upper, cervical thoracic issues. And so we got to look at those four things. What's your caffeine intake look like? What's your alcohol look like? What does, other things, what does your menstrual cycle look like? Different things like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at with migraine, and concussion can mess up any aspect of that. So all concussion has whiplash. You can't get concussion without exceeding the threshold for whiplash. So we got to look at that sort of musculoskeletal pillar, that musculoskeletal stressor that you're pouring in. We're having more and more data come out now that following concussion, there's pituitary dysregulation, so pituitary hypofunction, and that I want to say, I'm forgetting the stat off my head. I want to say it was like 12 or 13%. But the first all-female study in concussion found that, I think it was like, again, 12 or 13%. Don't quote me on that number, but had an overt like menstrual irregularity, overt pituitary dysfunction following the concussion within the months after. So that's another kind of pillar. And then why is diet mattering? So we know that after concussion, within hours, like really quickly within hours, blood-brain barrier starts to get leaky, and then that gut starts to get leaky. And I hate the term leaky because you don't actually leak. If it truly leaked the way that people describe, we would all be septic. There's enough lipopolysaccharide, there's enough pro-inflammatory stuff in the gram-negative bacteria in my gut that I could kill hundreds of thousands of people. Like I would have, if we actually leaked, I would have toxic shock syndrome, or I'd be septic all the time. So what we see is that blood-brain barrier leakiness, that blood-brain barrier inflammation goes down and kicks off some gut inflammation, gut leakiness, and you get this feed-forward kind of inflammatory cycle through the gut-brain axis connections. And so what we'll see is that, like from my own personal example, is that my diet had to get really meticulous in terms of dairy intake, because whey protein casein just triggers the hell out of an immune response in me now after my head injuries. And so for you, it could be, again, multiple things, but it could be that diet substantially impacting your headaches and your migraines after via this gut-brain connection. And if you look up gut-brain axis and migraines, there's a whole body of literature there as well. And so we know that concussion messes up the gut-brain axis, and we know there's a gut-brain axis connection to migraine. Very long answer there, but when I cheat once in a while, I worsen things a lot. Will I have to stick with this diet forever, or will it eventually not be needed? It depends. It depends on what you're doing in terms of treatment. Prolonged restricted diets are not recommended because, and this might be like uh, tough to hear, but prolonged restricted diets are not recommended because they can, through their own restriction, can worsen dysbiosis and different things in the gut. Your gut thrives on a diversity of things. And so when we limit that diversity, we also tend to see changes in the microbiome that aren't all that beneficial. And so there are ways that we want to reintroduce foods, and that may or may not help. But yeah, so it's hard to say that if you'd have to be on it forever or not without knowing more about your case, but just know that with restrictive diets in general, they should be temporary. They shouldn't be like a lifestyle for most people. I think that's the last question on Instagram. How can you tell if you had a concussion or whiplash? So it comes down to, it's tricky. Symptoms are going to be about the same. So the way that you go through a concussion workup is the three things you want to for sure rule out. You need to make sure that you're at a specific symptom threshold. So we want to see at least 7 symptoms, and it's more likely if your symptom severity is kind of in the 30s or 40s or higher. And so we're looking at the post-concussion symptom scale. Then we're going to do what's called a vestibular oculomotor screening, so a VOMS. and that's going to kind of rule in or rule out concussion. If you do not have symptoms on a VOMS, we are 92 to 96% certain that you don't have a concussion. And so then the lie detector there is the Buffalo concussion treadmill test. And so what I would say is that if you have a high symptom score, you can pass the VOMS, or your VOMS is questionable. You just kind of gradually flare the whole time, but nothing really provokes you. And then you have late exercise intolerance, meaning you can pass the Buffalo concussion treadmill test, but then you call my office a couple hours after the visit and you go, yeah, actually, I feel really terrible. Then I'm thinking more whiplash, because you technically pass everything, but you have a high symptom score. And then what we would do is we would then look at the neck. We would actually palpate. We would actually like, can we provoke any symptoms by feeling the musculature? Do you have normal range of motion? Do you have normal proprioception with a joint position error test? I use the neck care device, and we use something called the butterfly test, where we actually cervicocephalic kinesthesia, but we look at sensory motor integration. Can you follow things? Does your neck give you bad information to your eyes and your ears? And then there's walking with head turn, smooth pursuit neck torsion. There's a bunch of stuff we can do to kind of isolate, is it coming from your neck? But it starts with those three things. What's your symptom score? What's your vestibular tolerance? And what's your exercise tolerance? And basically, if those are mostly normal or normal, but you still have a high symptom score, then we're going to go down the neck rabbit hole. Had strokes like 6 years ago, came back almost fully, and then 5 months ago had your first seizure. I am sorry to hear that. There is some evidence on like post TBI and seizures, so that's a bummer. I'm sorry to hear that. All right, I think. Sorry, last question on YouTube. Had an epidural hematoma a few months ago. Fatigue have been extreme. Is there anything I can do to combat it? Yes, so it depends. So even in moderate and severe TBI, there was actually where was I going to go? So even with moderate and severe TBI, there was a study just published in like the last month where we were looking at exercise can still actually be a beneficial intervention there. I am not giving you medical advice to exercise. So if everything is clear there, vasculature is good, neurosurgeon, neurology, cardiology, everyone says like, hey, it's okay to start moving around again, I would start moving around again. And I know the fatigue sucks, but part of the final common pathway in POTS and other kind of deconditioning states is the deconditioning. And so I would approach it by looking at nutritional status. I would approach it by subsymptom exercise. There's a few things we would do, but the biggest thing would be start symptom limited activity and see if you can start with an exercise plan, a subsymptom aerobic exercise plan. Reason for delayed symptoms, is it always the neck, or could there be other reasons? So delayed exercise intolerance. So yes, so usually the neck, could also be vision, could also be vestibular. It's hard to tie. It's not impossible, but it's kind of hard to tease those apart. And again, the example that I always use is like, with your eyes open, look to the left, which system was active? Well, it was my eyes could see, my vestibular system felt, and my neck was actually moving. And so when we see this delayed intolerance after exercise, it's usually kind of like a fatigue of like, you have to do this with your VOR when you're like walking, even though your head's not actually moving, you have to do this. And so I think it's almost like a delayed onset muscle soreness, but for your eyes and ears and neck. Where was I going with that? So it's usually the neck. It could be something metabolic. It could be something inflammatory. I'm working with a case right now, a young dude who is otherwise like a vibrant guy who just cannot get past like 50-55% of his exercise tolerance. And I am super convinced that is metabolic more than it is autonomic, because he is here. He's not overstimulated by anything. He is otherwise very normal. He's like deceptively normal with terrible exercise tolerance. And at that point, I think more about the fuel than I think about the machine. So that was long and kind of rambly, and I don't know if I answered directly or not, if I just kind of dodged the question, but it's usually cervical. It could be visual vestibular as well. Very rarely, but possibly metabolic, but usually that's going to be like an earlier thing. Usually if it's metabolic, there's like no tolerance. Okay. Possible to pass a VOM 5 years post. Yeah, it's totally possible to pass the VOMs. No, if so, it does not mean that the TBI never happened. So there could just be resolution of those dysregulations, those deficits. But it's not necessarily that the concussion or the traumatic brain injury never happened. Yeah, so delayed symptoms for everything. I think more about the migraine piece. Migraine has like a dysautonomia flavor to it. So that's kind of where I would think for your case. But okay, so we're at 20 minutes. I think we're done with questions on YouTube. I think I've kind of rambled plenty here. So I'll chat with you all next week. Thank you everyone for showing up. Let's get